Okay, we're good. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to 2024. Hooray! All right, so our first meeting of the year, we'll call the Grimsby Heritage Advisory Committee meeting to order then. And I'll start with our land acknowledgement. The Niagara region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Haudenosaunee, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Thank you. Okay, I'm calling for a disclosure of any pecuniary interests. And then moving forward to the approval of the agenda. Any comments, questions regarding the agenda? Okay, can I have a mover then? Okay, Brian, fantastic. All in favor? Perfect, thank you. I like that today I only have to look one direction. This is nice. Okay, moving on then to the receipt of previous minutes from December. Any questions about the previous minutes? Okay, can I have a mover? Okay, wonderful, Amy. All in favor? Perfect, that's carried. All right, and to our verbal update for this evening, the West Lincoln Designation Workshop presented by Bianca. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Good evening, everyone. So just a quick update on this. So I just wanted to remind everyone that the workshop is on January 18th and it starts at 6 o'clock. And I just wanted to note, if anyone was interested in helping to present the training presentation, if you could just let us know by the end of the week so that we can make sure that everyone has that information, the information they need. And then I just wanted to add that we are all really looking forward to, and I know amongst the committee we've discussed it, we're looking forward to this networking opportunity and the opportunity to collaborate further with the greater Niagara region. So thank you. That's everything I have.
Okay, thank you, Bianca, for that update. I know we're looking forward to the January 18th workshop. You can definitely put myself down to help present if anyone else is interested. Yeah, you can just chat. Okay, it looks like we have a couple. That's awesome. I know it went really well with the town of Lincoln, so it's good to kind of expand our community and our kind of community practice in terms of research. That's fantastic. Okay, moving forward then to our first report of the evening, street name request update. Bianca, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you, through you, the chair. So this is an update since the last committee meeting. So in December, we talked about potentially using an Indigenous name for the condo road near Foreign's Marina. So since then, we've received some correspondence from the Grimsby Historical Society, and they've shared with us some of their experience with the topic and provided some benchmarking of other scenarios in other municipalities and provided more information on the importance of having consultation with the communities. And then I've also had an opportunity to talk with the Public Works Department and see where the Transportation Master Plan is. And so as a part of the Transportation Master Plan in 2024, they're going to be developing a formal street naming process. And we've discussed the importance of having an Indigenous consultation period be a part of that. Sorry about that.
What a dance music to our night.
Yeah, so I've had a chance to talk with Public Works, and that's definitely something we want to take into consideration. But with this particular file, we're moving towards the step where they need to issue the building permits. So the building department does need a name for this one. So I've brought the names back from last week, and the staff recommendation is that we make sure we do that in consultation, especially since there's some municipalities that it wasn't well received. So we just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence that way. And then again, I'm just leaving up to the committee for a name that they think's most appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. I'm excited to hear about that study, the street naming study, and kind of to give us a practice of how to do this going forward as the community, of course, grows. Councillor Costangi, you had your hand up.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I also talked to the Director of Public Works about the street naming policy as well, too. So I was happy to hear that that is something that we are going to create and change going forward. And I agree that you know, having a diverse pool of resources to ask will definitely open up our options and stuff. And I think that I agree, like, obviously with this one going forward, we can continue on with what we were doing. But once the new policy goes, then we can create a little bit more diversity in our research as well as our street naming.
Thank you for that, Councillor Costangi. So we had a good conversation about names in December, going back to the original document that the Historical Society prepared for us. And I do think it's worth noting generally that, you know, some of the history that we were exploring with the question of, is some sort of Indigenous naming appropriate in this area given its location to, you know, historic creeks and shorelines? You know, these are questions as we do work towards, like, you know, diversifying the stories that we're telling in our community. And like one thing I was thinking about is when it comes to sharing diverse stories, working class stories, you know, visible and minorities that might have been part of Grimsby, is like, that's when we kind of sometimes have to think beyond the archive itself, right? Like historical archives across Canada are primarily collecting the works, the documentation of historically white citizens, prominent citizens, wealthy citizens, business owners, property owners, and this lends to a certain type of history. So I do wonder when we talk about that street naming policy, thinking of how we can be inclusive of oral histories, of, you know, the memories of even people growing up, and including that as being just as valuable as the written records that they exist also. So I think that's something to keep in mind going forward. Any thoughts on the street naming for this particular street that's come before us? Yes, Brian, go ahead.
Through you, Chair. Just my insights on this one. I liked the Hans Place, Hans Inlet. I liked the connection to the fishing industry. I wasn't aware of it in that area there, and I think it was. And it also progressed to where that group that was the family that was fishing there also started to use the area after it was dredged. So I thought it was a really interesting piece that enlightened me on the industry there, especially an industry that doesn't really exist anymore in the Grimsby area. So a nice way of commemorating it, reminding us around that place there. So that would be my first preference. Second preference, I did like the story around Commander Yeo and important battle in a very important war in Canadian history, the town of Grimsby, of course, and then just the fact that he'd never been recognized before in the town of Grimsby. So I thought that would be my second choice. I do think Hans, either of the two choices, Hans Inlet or Hans Place, were those resonated the most with me on that. And just one other question. I trust that it's been done, but I got to ask it just in case. With all the streets being renamed and places being renamed around our country and other countries, just a confirmation that we've double checked that there's no unsavory background with any of the names that have been put forward, just to make sure we don't inadvertently highlight something that, a history piece that we don't necessarily know. So I just want to maybe just ask that question and confirm, double check.
Thank you, through the chair. So the research was provided by the Grimsby Historical Society, but as a part of that review we do with the region, we also do our due diligence that way, just make sure there's nothing there. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your input, Brian. I know back in December I also expressed the Hands story is quite interesting and one that we don't often tell when we talk about Grimsby's 19th century history. So I was drawn to that also as an opportunity to share a little bit more of that industrial part of our past. Amy, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, through you, Chair. No, I was just going to circle back to December's conversation because I know we were kind of split between the hands recognition, and I think we had talked about like Victory Way and some other things. And I think given the conversation that we had with the renaming in the other area in connection with the war, that, my recommendation is I like Hands Inlet. But I also am in agreement with everybody, I think, recognizing, the fishing, the area, and more focus around the 40 Mile Creek. So I think that would be good. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Through you, Chair, we also don't have anything named 40 Mile. So we can keep it simple, right? Like the 40 Mile Creek is right next to this, and we don't have anything named after the 40 Mile Creek. So unless we want to save that for something big, that's it. It would be an appropriate name too, and and the lighthouse at the end of the way, or light station. I guess it's not really a lighthouse, but whatever you want to call that thing, something that's kind of a beacon. Pardon the I don't know, that's not really a pun, but whatever you want to call that. I'm fine with all of those, but I don't, honestly, not one is better than the other for me. So whatever the committee chooses is fine with me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's also an option to maybe look more just like geographically honor recognize the geography of the area as well. I did do some research into like the native species of the area also, so that lending from that interest of going down like maybe a more indigenous influenced way, like looking at rather like the flora, the fish that they might have hunted, that kind of thing. So I looked up Elizabeth Simcoe's diary. So thank you for sending that, Counselor, to Flavio. And she mentioned seeing salmon, tortoise, sturgeon, wild rice. But I don't know if those are names we want to give a street. And she also noted a lot of edible flowers and medicinal herbs. And when I looked those up, some that were more appealing to me at least they're not really appealing, but there's milkweed, there's bulrush, and nine bark. So those are some of the more native species in the area. That could be an option too if we want to go more with that, the area and what used to grow there and what, the neutrals would have likely seen there also. So that's just to throw a little bit more. But if we want to go with proper Grimsby, settler Grimsby history, it looks like Hands Inlet. It looks like something that's been resonates to all of us. So any comments on milkweed as a street name? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Not a big fan of milkweed, but I love the idea behind it. Absolutely. I do like the idea of the 40 concept because we were originally called the 40, and if there is nothing along that way that sort of is named after the creek or alongside the creek, I do like that idea. And then I would like Hans Place as well too. So.
Okay, so should we vote? What's the best way to go about this?
Somebody's got to pick one. We'll vote on it because like I said, I'm fine with any of those. So.
Okay, so it looks like
Not milkweed. Or sturgeon, but the other ones.
Fair enough.
This is the thing here.
So it looks like an option for us is just for someone to put a motion forward for a name, and then what happens?
And then you'll vote on it.
And then we will vote on it. So if someone wants to do that.
Through you, Chair, just to move it along, it sounds like hands resonated with a lot of us, and we've got a good story that goes along with it. And I think there's other good options there, but it seems like that one we keep coming back to it, and we have the work the Historical Society did on it. So I'll put a motion forward to use, I guess we got to choose one of the two of them. Hands Inlet sounded a nice ring to it.
Okay, so a motion for Hands Inlet, and then what do I do?
So just put that in the blank and then that'll go like to the line. Got it?
Sorry, folks, this is my first time doing a vote here, like this. Hands Inlet. Okay, so Brian moved to have, so Brian moved that our street name request update was received and that Hands Inlet be recommended. I messed all of this up. Sorry, 1 second, guys. Okay, let me start again. So Brian has moved that the street name request update be received and that the Grimsby Heritage Advisory Committee recommends that Hands Inlet be used as a proposed street within the approved development at Mariners Bay Point. And that while the transportation master plan is underway, that a street naming process being established that includes meaningful consultation with indigenous communities. How's that sound? Yes. Yes, Councillor Christine, you go ahead.
Can we just add to, I just don't want to exclude it to Indigenous communities, so.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I like it. I just don't want to only have the consultation with Indigenous communities because we have African-American history and other demographics as well. So if we could just broaden that so that we have a variety of diverse, just word it a little bit differently, yeah.
There's an image of Hewitt's Inlet. I don't know if you could see it from there, but I'm trying to figure out where that is, if that's the creek that we're looking at, or if that's that, so okay.
That was created.
So we should be calling it Swamp Lane then, is what I'm hearing. Okay, everyone, thank you for bearing with us. I'm going to read this again. Brian moved that the street name request update be received, and that the Grimsby Heritage Advisory Committee recommends that Hands Inlet be used as a proposed street name within the approved development at Mariners Bay Point, and that while the transportation master plan is underway, that a street naming process is being established that includes meaningful consultation with diverse communities, including Indigenous representatives. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. That is carried. Hands Inlet is our new street name. That's very exciting. Okay, what's next? Oh, here it is. I misplaced my agenda. Wow, everyone. Okie doke. On to our first designation research report of... No, the demolition. The demolition request is first for 9 Adelaide Street. Garrett, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. The property at 7 to 9 Adelaide Street has 2 structures on it, one known as 7 Adelaide and one as 9 Adelaide. It's important to note that this removal request is only for the building at 9 Adelaide Street. The building was added to the register in May of 2022. On November 30th, 2023, the property owner submitted a complete register removal request for the property, stating that they intend to demolish the structure. Once a complete demolition request has been received, staff have 60 days to provide the applicant with a decision from council. In order to ensure the committee and council can make a decision before January 29th, 2024, staff have prioritized the review of the property. The Heritage Committee's recommendation will go to council on January 15th, 2024. Staff conducted a site visit December 15th, which included an exterior-only assessment of the structure. During the analysis, it was found that the structure was likely constructed in the 1870s as a carriage house or an auxiliary building. By the 1880s, the building was owned by Reverend Phelps, who converted the building into a dwelling that was to be used as an income suite. Reverend Phelps was significant in the Methodist camp teachings in Grimsby Beach. Although Phelps owned the property, he inhabited the house at number 7 and had always leased out number 9 and never lived within the dwelling. The property has been continued to be used as a rental. Later on, the property at 7 to 9 Adelaide had associations with James Brody, a community member who worked for the town and contributed to the design of Queen's Lawn Cemetery. Queen's Lawn Cemetery is a notable cemetery within the community that is the final resting place for many notable figures within Grimsby's past. Brody's plantings within the cemetery remain today and act as a tangible representation of Brody's influence on the overall design of the cemetery. Brody's impact on Queen's Lawn can be better commemorated through the long-term retention of the mature vegetation contained within the cemetery. The property at 7 to 9 Adelaide Street also has a potential connection to the Merritt Basket Factory. While the 1931 census records confirm that the property tenants worked in a basket factory, it was also recorded that same year that a single working female lived in the home, with her occupation being identified as a housemaid. Many of the properties along Adelaide were converted into multiple unit housing to meet the needs of the surrounding industry. The property at 9 Adelaide has been identified as a rental property that held a variety of tenants working in various occupations. Within this research, it was confirmed that there are direct connections to the basket factory found elsewhere on Adelaide that serve as a stronger and more tangible representation of the housing needed to support these industries. Due to the lack of direct connections, the property has not met the associative criteria to merit designation. During the assessment on December 15th, staff confirmed the poor condition of the structure, and while speaking with the property owner, were able to confirm that the structure was no longer inhabited because of the condition. The southwest and northeast corner lean in opposite directions, causing a significant strain on the wood frame construction. The building also has a significant hole created by an animal under the building's sill plate that displayed a considerable amount of wood rot. The addition to the rear is also showing signs of deterioration. In summary, staff recommend that the dwelling at 9 Adelaide Street be removed from the Municipal Heritage Register, as this exhaustive review has concluded that this property does not merit the criteria for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff recommend that the photos taken before the demolition of the structure at 9 Adelaide Street be provided to the Grimsby Historical Society for their archives, and that viable material from the demolition be salvaged and/or offered to salvage companies to avoid high-quality materials from going into the landfill. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett, and thank you for your very diligent effort in researching this property. Any questions from the committee? Yes, Brian, go ahead.
Through you, Chair. With this property, so number 9 makes sense that it doesn't meet any of the real criteria there. Do we think there's going to be a different outcome with 7? Like, do we anticipate that we'll see the 7 will go down that path there? And second part to the question is just, if the answer to that is yes, then I think we may want to look at in the recommendations. I think with prior other properties with this, we've recommended they do some, I think, like seismic monitoring just to make sure if that other property that's there close by is protected while they do the demolition there. So kind of two-parter there, and the second one really relies on the first one's response. Thanks.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, so the vibration monitoring device, that is something that we could look at having be put in number 7. We have recommended that 7 Adelaide Street be further assessed down the road for the possible designation, but right now it hasn't been a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. That's interesting. Is that something that we can possibly add to our recommendations or to this?
Maybe we'll just put it down here, and that, you don't need it?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for bringing that forward, Brian. I think that's a great idea. Anyone have any other questions or comments regarding this report? I have a question, but I'll wait until after Bianca stops or is writing.
Through the chair, I just wanted to confirm. So for this, I would think best is probably to do like the glass and epoxy on the foundation. We'll find a settlement crack and place that there. And then we can keep an eye on that glass and epoxy to see if a crack is forming during the deconstruction, rather than having them install actual monitoring devices. I think the glass and epoxy will be sufficient. Does that sound good to the committee?
Yes, we trust your judgment. And while we wait, since Wayne's in the room, Wayne, I want to thank you for your research on this property as well. It was very thorough and fascinating history. So thank you. Well, I have some questions. So, I thank you. I just wanted to get that written down. What was still in our mind, but I have a question that kind of relates to protecting 7 Adelaide, but then also Adelaide Street in general as well. Learning about the research from Wayne and my own research that I've been doing on the street, like, I understand and I can appreciate why, like, this 9 Adelaide, like, the request for demolition makes sense, right? Like, you've done your due diligence. It's not going to be standing for much longer, just like structurally, so like, it makes sense. But it does make me think about like how we can ensure that like the cultural heritage value of a street like Adelaide Street, like the Depot District, how that can be protected going forward. Because we know that, you know, the street generally isn't considered like high priority on our designation work plan because there's so much pressure coming from all over. But I think about, this brings me back to the idea of industrial and working class history too. Like I'm sure Wayne saw in his research and my own, when it comes to working class history, sometimes it's hard. The records aren't always there. You can't find them as much. In terms of the people that live in these places, it's a little bit difficult, but like contextually, that industrial history is so important to the town, especially that part, right, with the railroad right there, and we have the Great Western Railway, and we know that there was lots of basket factories and canning factories in the area, and that collectively tells a really important picture. And then we have Adelaide Street, which was, you know, some of the earliest working class, if you will, homes that don't meet the same idea of heritage in terms of like the stately structure that was built by someone important in town. But again, it's like associative value that tells an important part of our history. So I'm just wondering, like, are there ways going forward, knowing that this demolition request has come through, knowing that, I mean, the homeowners might plan to build something else there, like how do we work to protect it, or at least interpret the history going forward? Like and maybe, I don't know what that looks like, but I just wanted to just say, like, just to have a conversation about it, because again, it's not the traditional history that we're telling about Grimsby. It's not the fruit farms that we've been, like on Main Street West, that we've been really diligent about designating right now. But again, that like working class industrial stories that are really important that might not look traditionally heritage the way that others. I just wanted to just have a conversation about that.
Through the chair, I was just going to add in just like talking about these options that we have. So I think this is the exact reason the register worked so well in Grimsby, because we have such a high retention rate and we don't know our stories. And I think sometimes it's easy when you have these large estates to see the obvious value. But as we're starting to see in some of these reports, some of these stories are so important, but they're hidden. But I think it's important to remember that the designation process under the Heritage Act still allows us to commemorate and protect those stories. And I think of the house that we did on Gibson Street, where it has a very strong associative and contextual value. And I think that would be the same for a lot of properties on Adelaide and along Depot Street. Like, that's a huge industrial area that has a lot of tangible evidence of those stories, right? So I know it's hard because we have so many properties to prioritize, but the best thing we can do for these buildings is find those stories, and then we can provide them with that protection. And then I was also going to add, like, this kind of brings up the heritage impact assessments. So right now, with these properties on the register, we have an ability to ask for these studies, but that's going to change. And so I think for the property owners who are going through the designation process now, I think they're starting to see the benefits of being protected, because when you have the ability to have a heritage impact assessment asked for, more care is taken when something's built next to you. So I think it's really important. I think we share the positives of being protected, because a lot of people are just seeing, you know, this perceived control, but in reality, we're actually helping you to maintain the character, and that applies on either side of you as well. So I think maybe as a committee, we start to like share that good news and the benefits of being protected, and at the same time starting to uncover these stories. I think it'll be easier for us to put those protections in place. But yeah, there are so many stories that are important that come from the working class, but sometimes you have to dig to find it. But yeah, I think that's an area we can look at. Like, I know the committee is starting to do some property research, so maybe this is an area that we can start in. But yeah, this is a very important corridor. We have a lot of those industrial pieces that I think are really important down here. So, and I think maybe this report brought that to light, right? Like a reminder of all those ones. So that's my thoughts.
I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. I don't know if the committee has any thoughts or comments they want to share, but this is just something that, yeah, kind of became front and center when I was just reading about the history of the area, and maybe that's something that I can put my mind to a little bit more. Is like, what are more creative ways that might not even just rely on the Heritage Act to help us share those stories too, knowing that the Heritage Act has changed. So how can we, be active and a little bit more creative in that way, especially when we have houses that, might not traditionally have that same aesthetic as other heritage properties. Any thoughts or questions, or am I just rambling on? Councillor Costangi, go ahead.
Thank you, through Chair. Maybe a great idea is education in the community on these parts of history that we don't know yet. Because, typically a lot of the residents know the standard history and they think of the history as just what we've learned so far, but we might get more engagement if we start advertising different type of history from the longtime residents who didn't know that these areas have this significance and stuff like that. So going back to sort of the original wanting to advertise and get people involved with the history, maybe we could use that as a tool to get some of this lesser known history out to the residents and stuff like that. And that could be through simple things like social media posts and at events and different things like that, or like little sort of quizzes and things like that, putting the history together.
Yes, I know we have talked about that before, like just more of that engagement education piece on social media. So maybe that is something that now that it's the new year and more of these stories are coming to light, maybe that's something that we act on. Amy, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, through you, Chair. No, I was just going to agree with you, Councillor Costangi. Even off record, we've had these conversations about, I think something that's important to all of us here is education, right? And getting it out by word of mouth to the community. We're not going to be able to preserve everything, but I think what's most important and most valued is that we're doing the research, we're getting the hidden stories, right? We're documenting it for future generations to see. But like social media, that's a great way, like running contests, right? Like we've talked about educating the schools, and I know are bringing some of the students, and there was some concerns about that and challenges with that, but opening it up to our own community, because I bet there's a lot of people out there who are fascinated, like you speak to yourself doing research. I'm the same way. I see a house that I like, start Googling, right? So there's a lot of people that we probably wouldn't even have to entice to take part in some sort of community involvement to get word of mouth out there. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Councillor Costangi, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair, again. Virtual tours. That way, even residents with mobility issues and things like that who aren't able to get into those areas of the communities, if we did a guided virtual tour, just like a historical tour through these neighborhoods and just say the history, that could be accessible for residents and residents in our long-term care and things like that who grew up in these areas might probably love to see that and recount the history as well.
That's a fantastic idea. I love that idea of a virtual tour, of actually just piling all these stories together that we've collected in a way that's like to create a narrative. Garrett, you had your hand up.
Thank you, through you, Chair. A virtual tour is a great way to document the neighborhoods as well and their existing conditions. I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Another thing too, I don't know if I brought this up in the past, and forgive me if this already exists. It doesn't exist to my knowledge. Do we have like a historical, a book of historical homes in the town of Grimsby that's available that documents like a short history on each property, on the designations, that can be purchased by the public, and those funds can go to Grimsby Historical Society, et cetera, because I know other municipalities and communities, for instance, Aldershot, that's something that they do, and it's a great way to get word out. And a lot of residents will share that and turn it into a coffee book, and people open it up, and that's just another way for consideration.
That's a cool, I like that idea also. Again, the way that staff have been preparing the reports has been very like neighborhood based, right? So we did Main Street West Corridor, we've done the industrial area, or we're starting to do the industrial area around like Mountain Street and Gibson Street, downtown. So I think that also lends to, if we don't want to if it might seem too personal to focus on specific houses, we at least have a lot from like general neighborhoods too. So that could be an option, and that could also lend itself to a virtual tour, right? I think these are really exciting ideas, and how would be the best way to record these ideas and work towards acting on them? What would be the best way to do that?
Through you, the chair, I think probably, like, I know we talked about working groups, and I don't know if like maybe this is a chance, like if education is a working group you want to work on, like that gives you an opportunity, if we establish one, for you guys to meet and like put a like strategy together, and then you can present to the whole committee what your recommendations are, and then maybe you come with a motion, and then we have something we can act on. I think that would be the best way to go about it. To have that momentum, because I think that's what we want. We want to build some momentum. So I think the working group would work really well for that, and then you can meet and talk about specifics of that. Yeah, that would be my recommendation, unless the committee wanted to put some type of motion forward here.
Okay, so we might, I like the idea of a working group. I think having like an public education outreach working group has been something we've talked about in the past, and I think that would give us an opportunity to like meet, share ideas, come up with something, whatever that could be. And also, maybe leverage other members of the community too. I'm not sure how that would work, but like, we have Historical Society, we have Nellis Manor, we have Grimsby, we have like all of these, groups that might be interested in something like that too. I don't know how that works for working group stuff, but like the conversations might be broader than what, for a couple people here can do. I'm not sure.
So through the chair, there is an opportunity to have people outside of the committee join working groups. So I think probably best, let's maybe establish a working group for education, and then I'll talk to clerks about the details, and then I can share that with you guys, and just for quorum and things like that. Because I know, because we don't have a very large committee, 3 people's quorum, but that makes it hard to have a smaller group for a working group. So I'll talk to them about our options that way. But I think tonight, if we establish it, and then I can get you guys the details on that, and then I could also find out the process for adding additional members. So I can do that for the next meeting, and then, yeah, so maybe pass a motion tonight establishing the working group and put a title on it, Education Working Group. And then once I've confirmed with clerks, then you guys can start meeting. So.
That sounds like a good plan to me. How does the rest of the committee feel about that idea? I'm seeing some nods. Okay, so we will make another motion here. Just give us 1 sec. Okay, thank you. So based on that conversation, we do have a new motion in front of us. What's the best way to read these?
Through the chair, I would probably do this one. You can do this one first, and then do this one to close out the item, and then we can move on to the next item. So you can do that one first. I was just saying to Sarah that I know we had talked about doing working groups, and so through that process, I was able to confirm with clerks that we don't need formal approval from council for the working group. We just need to, as a committee, initiate it. So once we pass this resolution, the working group will be established, and then I'll follow up with you on any quorum rules.
Thank you, Bianca. Okay, I have a motion here that the committee establishes a education and outreach working group. Do I have a mover? Amy, thank you. All in favor? Hooray. Okay, that's great. Awesome. Thank you. That's exciting. I feel like this maybe will start getting some of this enthusiasm that we've been sharing at the meetings and moving forward with it. So that's great. Thank you all for that. Okay. So this all came about from the demolition request report. So going back to the report, we've added a section about adding a vibration monitoring device to 7 Adelaide. So thank you again, Brian, for putting that forward. Is there any other questions you have about this? I know I'm not sure if it's worth putting in here that we seem interested in pursuing 7 Adelaide Street. Is that? Oh, that is, and oh my gosh, it's in there. Perfect. Okay, never mind. So I think let's move forward on this then. I'll read what's become a longer motion in front of me. And okay. So resolved that the Heritage Property Recommendation Report at 9 Adelaide Street be received, and that the Grimsby Heritage Advisory Committee recommends the dwelling at 9 Adelaide Street be removed from the Municipal Heritage Register under Section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act as a property that council believes to be of cultural heritage significance, as it does not meet 2 or more of the Ontario Regulation 906 criteria for designation under the OHA. And that photos be taken before the demolition of the structure at 9 Adelaide Street, and that those photos be provided to the Grimsby Historical Society for their archives, and that viable material from the demolition be salvaged and or offered to salvage companies to avoid high-quality materials from going into the landfill, and that vibration monitoring devices be added to the property at 7 Adelaide, and that these devices include the installation of glass and epoxy on the foundation at 7 Adelaide, and that staff be provided access to the glass and epoxy throughout the duration of the demolition, and that the property at 7 Adelaide be exhaustively evaluated for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Do I have a mover? Councillor DeFlavio, thank you. All in favor? Wonderful. Thank you. That's carried. All right, next up is our first designation research report of the evening, 22 Main Street West, presented by Garrett. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest, staff recommend that the property at 22 Main Street West be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff have concluded that the property has met 9 out of 9 prescribed criteria of the Ontario Regulation 906. The property meets the criteria for design and physical value because 22 Main Street West is a rare and unique example of a 2.5-story, 3-bay Georgian home with significant Victorian additions and decorative details. The home was originally constructed by Jacob Collidor in 1839 for Jonathan Wolverton. The blending of its Georgian massing form and fenestration with Victorian additions and decoration is a unique combination that is not otherwise seen in the area. The presence of a cantilevered turret, a rarity in Grimsby, is a difficult architectural feature to successfully implement and demonstrates the high quality of the builder's skill set. The property meets the criteria for historical and associative value because the property at 22 Main Street West has direct associations with notable figures in Grimsby's history. The Georgian Victorian structure was home to one of Grimsby's first doctors, Jonathan Wolverton, who was from a Loyalist-era Yankee immigrant family. Jonathan served as a surgeon in the 4th Lincoln Militia during the Rebellion of 1837, including at the siege of Navy Island. The structure was actively used as a medical office and as a classroom setting for Grimsby Grammar School. Later, it was the home to James A. Livingston, the longtime editor and proprietor of the Grimsby Independent, which was known to be published from the adjoining building at 24 Main Street West from 1893 to 1914. The property meets the criteria for contextual value because the property is one of the oldest in the area, demonstrating the area's development history. Jonathan Wolverton's home is one of the earliest surviving buildings within the downtown, built originally as a residence and was expanded and transitioned to a mixed-use building as the downtown evolved. The property's architectural uniqueness as a Georgian Victorian hybrid and its distinctive setback from the street make it readily identifiable as a reference for navigating the neighborhood and downtown Grimsby. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest and significant findings, staff recommend that the property at 22 Main Street West be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Oh, I meant to say this prior. Staff would like to note to the committee that all property owners have been given notice twice of the proposed designation of their properties. Staff are working collectively with property owners to address any questions or concerns they may have. We would also like to thank the Grimsby Historical Society and community members for their contributions towards the preservation of these buildings, as well as Wayne Mullins from Legacy Research. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Any questions or comments from the committee? Amy, yes.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just found it fascinating, and I think it was noted in the designation report that I made note that it's the only product of its kind within the town, architecturally. And I think it's still very noticeable. We talked about that on Main Street, but it saddens me a little bit when you look at that original picture, how some of the character really is still lost amongst the downtown. But I think this is a great step forward, and yeah, it was just a fascinating history. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Amy. And to add to that too, I was excited. I was happy to see that in the report that we're looking to designate and honor all layers of that history too, from its Georgian era, which was quite surprising that it was built in the 1830s. So that's interesting. But then also to know that there are Victorian additions, and we are going to that's part of the history too. So I was glad to see that we're designating all those different layers, not just one. Any other comments or questions? Okay. I will go. Let me just look for the motion here. Okay, motion here resolved that 22 Main Street West be designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that a notice of intention to designate be issued in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act. A mover? Brian? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay, next up is a research report for its neighbor, 24 Main Street West. Garrett, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, through you, Chair. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest, staff have recommended that the structure at 24 Main Street West be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff have concluded that the structure has met 4 out of 9 prescribed criteria of the Ontario Regulation 906. So the property didn't meet any criteria for design and physical value. It was based on the associative value and contextual value. So the property meets the criteria for historical and associative value because 24 Main Street West has direct associations with the Livingston family and their publication, The Independent, as well as the Miller family, who owned various businesses on Main Street West. James and Isabel Livingston were convinced by Matt Maggard to buy his recently established newspaper, the Grimsby Independent, which he called the People's Paper. James Livingston became the sole proprietor before the paper's second issue. The building was integral to the business, and the Livingstons during this time lived out of the adjacent Victorian house at 22 Main Street West. Thanks to the contributions of James Livingston, his family, and the staff, The Independent provides a clear and complete documentation of Grimsby's events, including the activities and daily life of the town's citizens. The property meets the criteria for contextual value because Grimsby's downtown commercial core is made up of predominantly 2- and 3-story mixed-use buildings commonly built out of masonry in the Victorian and Italianate styles. 24 Main Street West contributes to this historic corridor and has been home to many important businesses and figures that supported the prosperity of the town. The building at 24 Main Street West is historically connected to 22 Main Street West. At the time of construction, the properties were on the same parcel historically owned by the notable Wolverton family. During the 1880s, the 2 structures were used by the Livingston family, who ran their very successful publication from the commercial structure. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest, staff recommend that the structure at 24 Main Street West be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We also wanted to note that we have some new information on this property as well that we will be including. It came from Wayne at the Grimsby Historical Society, so we may be providing an update on this at the next meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett, and I look forward to additional information. Any questions or comments from the committee? Okay, great. Surprised that it wasn't already on the register. And especially its associative value with the Grimsby Independent and its neighbor, right? So yeah, that's really exciting to see it being designated. All right, if we don't have any questions or other comments, I'll go forward with the resolution. Resolved that 24 Main Street West be designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and then a notice of intention to designate be issued in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act. A mover? Flavio? All in favor? Perfect. Okay, that's carried. Thank you. All right, next up is our last designation research report of the evening, 34 Mountain Street. Go ahead, Garrett.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest, staff recommend that the property at 34 Mountain Street be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff have concluded that the property has met 4 out of 9 prescribed criteria of the Ontario Regulation 906. And the assessment was based on the associative and contextual value of the property as well. The property meets the criteria for historical and associative value because Charles T. Farrell resided at 34 Mountain Street during his tenure as the first mayor of the town of Grimsby. While Charles lived in 34 Mountain Street, the property was decorated for parades, elections, and other community events. Charles was beloved by the community and was re-elected once again in 1923 by acclamation, meaning that there was no vote by ballot, but rather vote by voice. The system of election was employed when the candidate was largely uncontested. The community's commitment to Charles speaks volumes of his virtues and dedication to the town's development and success. The dwelling at 34 Mountain Street is a direct link to Charles and his legacy as the first mayor of the municipality known today as the town of Grimsby. The property meets the criteria for contextual value because the historic structure is situated at the base of the escarpment and is visible as you travel up the Mountain Street corridor. The scale, mass, and form of the dwelling contributes to the established character of Mountain Street. The property remains well known for its association with the Farrell family, primarily Charles's role as the first mayor of Grimsby. Charles lived in the dwelling during his tenure on council, and the historic dwelling is a lasting, tangible link to this important period in Grimsby's early development. The historic dwelling is also historically and visually linked to its surroundings, as the original front porch of the house was historically used to advertise and celebrate during campaigns and holidays, demonstrating Farrell's pride for his family home and community. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest and significant findings, staff recommend that the property at 34 Mountain Street be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Another really interesting report with, again, uncovering those stories that are kind of new to us. That's exciting. Any comments or questions? Oh, Garrett's going to say one more thing.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just wanted to add in that we have some new information about this property as well that we'll be including into the report in the future. Thank you.
That's great. I did have one question when it comes to the associative value that you list in the. It's too far away for me. So we focus on that the house was associated with the Farrells, and I think that is really important. But I think it's also valuable to include in there about the Allisons as well, and that more of that industrial history that we were talking about. Because I could be wrong, but did the Allison is who built the house? Is that correct?
Through you, Chair. No, that's some of the history that we're going to review with the Historical Society. So no, the Allisons did not build the property. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe I should wait until what's being added to the report, but I think I would like to see more of that industrial history added to the associative value of the house going forward, just so that we have record of it. And just based on even the conversations we've been having today about what matters when we add it to these designations. So thank you. Look forward to learning more. Okay, if there's no other questions, then I can move forward to the resolution. Resolved that 34 Mountain Street be designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that a notice of intention to designate be issued in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act. A mover. Councillor Kristanji, thank you. All in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you.
Can I just add one thing?
And Bianca's going to add one thing.
I just wanted to update the committee and let them know that sometimes information, because we bring them to the committee in draft form, sometimes community members, sometimes the committee will submit comments, and we also share all these reports with the Grimsby Historical Society. But I just wanted to reassure you that before any designation bylaws are passed, all that information is collected, vetted, and we have a final copy that's inclusive of all documents. So I just wanted to make sure that we'll get this all right before the bylaws passed.
Thank you. We had full trust, but it's good to know that you are doing your due diligence. Thank you very much. I think then, if that's everything, any announcements from the committee? Yes, Councillor Kristanji, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I learned that within the next couple of weeks, we have a new book coming out written by a Grimsby resident, born and raised, and it is about the 100-year history of the Grimsby Peach Kings. It is going to be a limited edition. There will only be 1,000 copies made. So it should be out hopefully by the end of the month, and we can keep everybody updated on where to get, but that's pretty exciting. So it'll go from 1922 to 2022, and it's specifically about the Grimsby Peach Kings. So that's exciting, and written by local author Sarah Allingham. So people might recognize that name, yeah.
Oh, that is really exciting. Thank you for sharing. I'll have to look out for that book. Get my hands on one of the 1,000 copies. Collector's item. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Anything else from the committee then? Okay, with that, then we will we'll adjourn for the evening and see you again in February. Thanks, all. Oh, I guess we're going to see you next week at the workshop. Don't forget about that. But then the committee will meet again in February. Okay, thank you.